We are beginning tonight's share in the beginning of Siman Kuf Lamed Hey, Hilchos Kriyas Sefer Torah. We are on page 32. Siman Kuf Lamed Hey is Seder Kriyas HaTorah b'Yom Sheni v'Chamishi, the order of Kriyas HaTorah on Mondays and Thursdays. We will begin with the introduction the Mishna Berura brings down before we start the Mechaber. The Mishna Berura says, Kosav HaRambam Perek Yud Beis Hilchos Tefillah. The Rambam says in Perek Yud Beis of Hilchos Tefillah, Moshe Rabbeinu tikein lohem liyisrael shiu koren b'Torah b'Rabim b'Shabbos u'b'Sheni u'b'Chamishi b'Shachris. Moshe Rabbeinu was masakin for Klal Yisrael. They should be reading the Torah publicly on Shabbos and on Mondays and Thursday mornings. Kedei shelo yishu shlosha yomim below shmias Torah. So Klal Yisrael should not go 3 days without hearing Torah. The Ezra tikein shiu koren gam b'mincha b'kol Shabbos. Ezra added on to Moshe's takana. Moshe was masakin Shabbos, Monday and Thursday morning, and Ezra added on Shabbos at Mincha. The reason why he added that on is Mishum Yoshve Kronos. Now, what exactly are Yoshve Kronos? So the Shar Tzion says, Heim Bale Malachos. These are people that work. She'ein lohem penai lishmoa kriyas haTorah b'Sheni v'Chamishi. They don't have time to wait around to hear the laning on Monday and Thursday. So even though it's not solving the problem of not going 3 days, but at least we added for Ezra was masakin for these people an extra kriya by Shabbos Mincha. The Ha'aruch Pirush, the Shar Tzion goes on and says, the Aruch explains, Inshit lo ayla lebei midrasha. These are people that don't go into the base medrash. Elo regilin sheyoshvin v'kronos ha'ir. They sit around in the corners of the city, v'oskim b'divrei sicha, and they're schmoozing. And therefore Ezra was masakin, whatever pshat you want to learn, for the Yoshvei Kronos, and added Kriyas HaTorah by Shabbos Mincha. Continues the Mishna Berura, v'gamhu tikein shiu koren b'Sheni v'Chamishi shlosha b'nei Adam v'lo yikru pachos me'asara psukim. In addition to being masakin Shabbos Mincha leining, he also was masakin that on Monday and Thursdays you must call up 3 people to the Torah, and you should read no less than 10 psukim. Ki bizman Moshe Rabbeinu olav hashalom lo haisa hatakana dafku shiu koren shlosha v'sheyikru asara psukim dafka. Because when Moshe Rabbeinu made his takana for Mondays and Thursdays, he did not give a number of aliyos, he did not give a number of psukim. So Ezra came to add on to that takana the amount of aliyos 3 and the amount of psukim 10. V'oso hu v'tikein davar zeh, Ezra came along and added on this takana. Ubi Yerushalmi Isa, the Yerushalmi brings down Moshe Tiken Lam Yisrael Shiu Koren B'Torah B'Shabbosos V'Yom Tov U'B'Rosh Chodesh B'Chol Shamoid. And the Yerushalmi says that Moshe was also masakin for Klal Yisrael to read the Torah on Shabbos, Yom Tov, Rosh Chodesh, and Chol Hamoed. Umeviu Harif Perek HaKori Omed. The Rif brings this down. V'Chenu B'Rambam Perek Yud Gimel Halacha Ches, and that's also brought down in the Rambam Perek Yud Gimel Halacha Ches. That ends the introduction of the Mishna Berura, and now we are going to begin Siman Kuf Lamed Hey Sif Aleph. The Mechaber says in Sef Aleph, B'Sheni u'B'Chamishi u'B'Shabbos Mincha Koren Shlosha, as we just mentioned. Monday and Thursday and Shabbos Mincha, we read 3 aliyos. Ein pochasin mehem ve'ein mosifan aleihem. We don't read less than 3, and we don't add on to the 3. Ve'ein maftirim ba'Navi, and as we know, there is no haftorah from the Navi on Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbos Mincha. The Ramah says, "V'im hayu shnei chasanim b'beis hakneses." If there were 2 chasanim in the shul, v'hem Yisraelim, and they are both Yisraelim, muter lahosif likros revi'is. Says the Ramah, then you are allowed to add on a 4th aliyah on Monday and Thursday to make sure both chasanim get an aliyah. Dilididhu have ki yom tov shemuter lahosif. For them it's a yontif, and a yontif you're allowed to add on, so we would add on for 2 chasanim. The Ramah continues and says, "V'nirid hu adin l'shnei balei bris." The same would be true for 2 balei bris. The Yom Tov shalahem hu k'dlakaman simen tov kuf nun tes. It's also their Yom Tov, and you also could add on aliyos to give 2 balei bris both an aliyah. Says the Mishna Berura, Sif Katan Aleph b'Sheni u'B'Chamishi b'Shachris. On Monday and Thursday morning we lane. The after b'diavad kol hayom zmana. Even though b'diavad you can really do the laning any time of day. Mikol makom lechatchila mitzvah lahaktim. Still lechatchila the mitzvah is to do it earlier, and therefore we lane on Monday and Thursday by Shachris. Sivkatan Bais ve'ein mosifan aleim. We said we do not add on aliyahs on Monday, Thursday, or Shabbos Mincha. Mishum bitul malacha la'am, because people have to get to work. You're going to make people late to work if you add on aliyahs. That's a very nice pshat from Monday and Thursday. Does not really explain Shabbos Mincha, because people are not going to work Shabbos Mincha. So if you want to see 4 explanations, you look at note number 5. Uma she'ein mosifin kruin b'Shabbos b'mincha af al pi she'ein b'zeh mishum bitul malacha. The reason the Shiur brings down a bitul malacha doesn't apply Shabbos mincha. So why there do we not add aliyahs? So 4 reasons. Number 1, the Matzah Shekel writes, Shemi'achar shenohagim lidrosh ad samuch l'chashecha. Since there's a long drasha on Shabbos afternoon till close to dark, lo ratzu chachamim la'atriach es atzibur b'hosafa. They didn't want to matriach the tzibur by adding on additional aliyos. That's reason number 1. Tam nosav kosav Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan says, Shelo itrichu es atzibur kevan shekvar karu b'shachris. They already lay in the shachris. They didn't want to be matriach them at mincha to add on more than the 3 aliyahs that were already set. Reason number 3, the Pri Megadim writes, Shehu mishum de lo plug rabbana mikriyas Torah shalchol. Anytime that we have 3 aliyahs, we don't add on. So the same way that on Monday and Thursday, for the reason given, we don't add on. Shabbos mincha also lo plug, even though the reason doesn't apply, we don't add aliyahs. And finally, reason number 4, v'o tam kasa. The Pri Megadim brings another reason. Shetzrichim lechol suuda shlishis. We have to get moving at each shalosh in time. We don't want to delay the davening. So those are 4 explanations why Shabbos mincha we will not add on more than 3 aliyahs. Continues the Mishna Berura in the middle of Sivkot and Bais. So besides not adding aliyos because of bitul malacha la'om, v'gam ein maftirin mitam zeh, we also don't have a haftorah on Mondays and Thursdays for that reason. Sivkot and Gimel mutter lahosif. We said that if you have 2 chasanim, that it's their day event, if you are allowed to add on, so they can both have aliyos. Kedei sheyuchlu shneim lalos laTorah. You could add on a 4th aliyah, that way both chasanim could get aliyos. Uladina kasu ha'achronim. The mice of the achronim right, the einu hagim kain. Our minhag is not to do that. V'kol shekain v'le'inyan balei bris b'vadei en lino kain. Certainly, when there's 2 balei bris, there's less of an inyan to get an aliyah than by a chasan. So certainly, we're not going to add on more than the 3 aliyos. That is the minhag. Says the Mechaber Vaitis of Bais, Makom shemafsikin b'Shabbos b'Shachris, the place that we end the laning on Shabbos morning, Sham korin b'mincha, that's where we start at that mincha, u'b'sheni u'b'chamishi u'b'Shabbos haba. As we know, we start from the next week's parsha, Shabbos mincha, Monday, Thursday, and the next Shabbos. The Ramah says, in bitlu Shabbos achas kriyas parsha b'tzibur, if 1 week they were mevatel the laning in the tzibur, they didn't lane that week. L'Shabbos haba korin osa parsha in parsha shaychel osa Shabbos. So if for some reason they didn't lane on week 1, so the next week on week 2 they'll lane parshios 1 and 2 together. If you look in the Bir Halacha, the Ramaskel Shabbos achas, the Ramah says that they will mevatel 1 Shabbos, so the Bir Halacha is medayik dafka Shabbos. There's a makeup for laning only if you miss a Shabbos. Aval in bitlo akriya b'sheni v'chamishi. If you miss laning on a Monday or Thursday, ein lo tashlum and liyom shel acharav. We don't make it up a different day. We only make up if we missed an entire parsha on Shabbos. Says the Mishna Berura of Katan Daled b'mincho b'sheni v'chamishi. So we said again, the place that we end the laning on Shabbos morning, that's where we start the Shabbos mincha laning, the Monday, Thursday, and the next Shabbos. V'imtou v'karu la'ashlosha kruin b'parsha rishona shel seder shavua ha'avar. Let's say they made a mistake, and a Shabbos mincha or Monday, Thursday, they laned the wrong parsha. Instead of laning next week's parsha, they laned last week's parsha. O shel shavua haba, or the following week's parsha, li'achar shavua zeh, which is after what's supposed to be done this week. So imhu ma'akev b'diavad olo, is that ma'akev? Do you have to lane again? Is that a problem? So ayin b'pislei tshuva shehevi deos ha'achronim bazeh. That's a machlokas in the achronim. Sivkoton hey in bitlu. So we're going now in the Ramah. The Ramah says you mevatel 1 Shabbos from laning b'tzibur, so you make it up the next week by laning both parshios. Says the Mishna Berura in Bitlo, why would you mevatel the laning? Machmas ketata v'kadoma. There's a fight that breaks out in shul or something similar. They were not able to get themselves together to do kriyas Torah that week. Umayri shelo karu kol hayom. We're discussing over here where they did not lane the parsha the entire day of Shabbos. Aval in bitlu rak b'shachris hakriya. But if they were only mevatel the laning at shachris, u'b'mincha kfar motzu menucha, and by mincha everything settled down and there was peace. So im yesh penai likros kol hasidra, if there is time, mincha time, to lane the entire parsha they were supposed to lane in the morning, yikru b'mincha kol hasidra, they should lane the whole parsha by mincha, the yikru shiva gavri, and they should call up 7 aliyos like they would have done in the morning, ki kol yom ha-Shabbos hu zman ha-kriya, because all day of Shabbos is the time for laning. Aval im gam b'mincha lo haya menucha, but if by mincha time the fight was still going on, they weren't able to get themselves together, so lo yikru b'sheni or b'chamishi kol hasidra mishabbos ha'avar. You don't make up last week's parsha on Monday or Thursday. Ki b'chol yesh bittul malacha la'am. The same reason we don't add aliyahs in general, we're also not going to add on a whole parsha that we missed last Shabbos because we want people to get to work. What will they do? Ella yikru rak ha-parsha min ha-seder shel Shabbos haba v'lo min Shabbos ha'avar. Rather, they will lane Monday and Thursday, even though they missed last week's parsha, they will still lane Monday and Thursday, the coming week's parsha, and they'll make up this coming week, last week's parsha, and the present parsha. Now, there is an important sharatzion over here in Os Hey, that which the Mishna Berura said that if they get themselves together by mincha time, they could lane. So how exactly do they do it? They have the 3 aliyahs of the new parsha, they have 7 aliyahs of the old parsha. So the Sharatzion explains, the yikru ha-seder shel shachris kodem ascholas ha-mincha. Before they start mincha, they will lane the morning's parsha that they were supposed to lane in the morning. They'll lane 7 aliyahs of the morning's parsha. The achar kach yomru ashrei uvelatzion. Then they'll start mincha. They'll say ashrei and uvelatzion. The achar kach yikru kriya shel mincha kanahug kein diroli. And then they'll lane 3 aliyahs like they normally do from the coming week's parsha. That's what the Chavetz Chaim says you would do. So you would lane the morning parsha before mincha, and then during mincha, like always, you will lane 3 aliyahs from the coming parsha. Sivkoton Vav Shabbos Achas. Again, we said it will mevatel 1 week the parsha. V'im kama Shabbosos. Let's say they missed a couple of weeks. So yesh omrim de'ein likros b'Shabbos haba ki'im hasidra hachrona smucha lazo. Some say if you miss parshos A, B, and C, so the week of D you only read C and D. You can't go back to A and B. The yesh omrim, and some say that tzara lahashlim batzibur kol hastaro shebitlu. Some say no, you have to make up A, B, C, and D. You have to make up all the parshos that you missed. Umeibir hagra mashma desvir lekadeh harishona. The Gra is mashma like the first shita, that you only make up the most recent week that you missed, and you don't go back to earlier weeks. The Sharatzion explains in Os Ches, midamedame lo lahashlomas tefillah. The Gra makes a comparison between making up a parsha and laning to making up a tefillah that you missed. V'sham halo kaimelam b'simen kuf ches, and we already learned in simen kuf ches when you miss a tefillah, the ein mashlimin elo tefillah smuchala. If you missed a few tefillos, you only make up the most recent tefillah that you missed, and you don't make up the previous one. So too over here, the Gra says if you missed 4 weeks of laning, you only make up the last week, and you'll leave off the first 3 weeks. If you look at the Bir Halacha over here, the first Bir Halacha on page 32 in Bitlu. So he says, Ayin Mishna Berura, the Ayin ba'teres l'kenan de mistapik. The Ateres l'kenan has the following suffix. Im davka b'shogeg or afilu b'mezid nami tzarech lahashlim. That which the Ramah says, if you miss a week, so you can make it up next week, is that only by shogeg, or even if it was b'mezid, they decided for whatever reason not to lane, can they also make it up? From the fact that the poskim don't really discuss this, it implies that afilu b'mezid nami mashlim, that even b'mezid you're allowed to make it up. No one says otherwise. However, mibir hagra denosev taima dahai dina midin tefillah, like we just saw in the Sharatzion, but for the words of the Gra that compares making up laning to making up davening, the kaimelon tov lo espal is that tefillah mashim also betefillah smucha. We pass him by davening that if you made a mistake, it was b'shogeg, and you didn't daven at tefillah, you can make it up in the next davening. Mashmu l'chora de dafka b'shogeg. The fact that the Gra makes the comparison, so it should follow that just like by tefillah, it's only b'shogeg, not b'mezid. By kriyas Torah, it would also be only b'shogeg that you can make it up, and not if it was done b'mezid. Kemohasam she'en lo tashlum b'mezid, kemavur b'simen kufches v'ayin. So it comes out according to the Gra that we make the comparison between making up a tefillah and making up laning. 2 nekudas. Number 1 that we're discussing in the Mishna Berura is that you only make up the last laning that you missed, not the earlier ones. Like by tefillah, you make up the last tefillah. And number 2, like the Bir Halacha says, according to the Gra, would come out, you could only make up the laning if it was a shogig, not if for some odd reason it was a mezid, then you wouldn't be able to make it up.
Tzibur? I'm not talking about a yachid, right?
This whole discussion is a tzibur. Says the Mishna Berura, Vaidus of Kotan Zayin. Kriyas HaParsha. Again, the Rama said in Bitlu Shabbos Achas Kriyas HaParsha B'tzibur. If you missed 1 week, the Kriya of the Parsha in the Tzibur. Says the Mishna Berura, V'im hayu shtei parshios mechubarim ba'oso Shabbos shebitlu. Let's say you missed the week of a double parsha. So we're discussing that you can make up the parsha next week, but what if you missed this week 2 parshios? So what do you do next week? So das haram mints de'ein mashlimin osam klal. There's no makeup. If you missed a double parsha, you can't make up anything next week. Why? De lo matzinu la'olam shekorin shalosh sdaros b'shabbos achas. We never find that you lane 3 parshios in 1 week. So that's not an option to make up the 2 parshios you missed last week. With the new parsha, that would be 3. That's not allowed. V'likros parsha achas mehen nami lo amrinin. And to choose one of the parshios that you missed and make that up next week and have 2, that's also, we don't say. There's no eitzah to fix it up halfway. There's no halfway eitzah. If you miss 2 parshios 1 week, you can't make up only one of them and not the other. And we don't find that you can make up both, have 3 parshios, and therefore you will skip it. The same thing would be true, obviously, if last week was 1 parsha, and this week is a double parsha. You can't make up last week's parsha this week, because we don't find that you lane 3 parshios. You're also not going to make up last week's parsha this week, for the reason mentioned above, that we don't find anywhere that you have 3 parshios together. That is what the Ram Mintz says. Ubagos minhagim cholek al kol zeh. However, the Agos Minhagim argues on all this. V'chein hiskim be'el Yerabah, and so too agrees the El Yerabah, not like we just said. The la'olam tzarech lahashlim mashebitlu mishabes ha'avar. That we always make up what we missed last week. We might only make up 1 week, but we make up whatever that week was. If it was a double parsha, we will in fact lane 3 parshios this week. If it's double parsha this week, we missed 1 last week, we'll lane 3 this week. V'chein note das sefer Magen Giborim. That is how the Magen Giborim leans to say as well. Continues the Mishna Berura. Yesh omrim din bitlu parshas vayechi. Let's say you missed 1 parsha, but it's at the end of a sefer. You missed parshas vayechi. Ein likroso in parsha shmos. You will not make up vayechi together next week with parsha shmos. Ki kishekoren shtei staros. Because when you lay 2 parshas together, as we know, tzorich likroso chad gavra misov sidra rishona l'tchila sidra shnia kidei shiu mechubarim. We know whenever you have a double parsha, we connect them by having 1 aliyah, finishing up the last parsha and starting the new parsha. That's not appropriate when it's vayechi and shmos from 2 separate svarim, so that's not appropriate, and therefore, if you miss vayechi, you cannot make it up in parsha shmos. The same thing would be the last parsha in Sefer Shmos of Pekudei. You wouldn't be able to make that up with Vayikra, assuming again Vayakra and Pekudei were separated. So you're making up Pekudei, so you would not be able to make it up next week, which is Vayikra, the Kadoma, and anything similar. V'yesh cholkin, but once again there are those who argue v'svirulu, and they hold the la'olam mashlim, and we always make it up. It doesn't matter if it's 2 separate svarim, you still can make it up the next week. Vayechi Shmos, no problem. The Kosav b'Shulchan Atzei Shitim. The Shulchan Atzei Shitim writes, "Da'anoe ki ein moch, da'anoe kain ein mochin biyodo." One is knowing this way. He lays on the week that he missed Vayechi. He's laying Vayechi and Shmos together. We will not protest against him. That's fine. Kosav b'Sefer Shari Ephraim. In bitlu akriya bebeis hakneses achas. If 1 shul was mevatel the kriya that Shabbos morning. V'rov hatzibur mebeis hakneses zeh, but most of the people from this shul went to another shul, and they were shamu kriyas haTorah bebeis hakneses acheres. They were mevatel at the 8 o'clock minyan, so everyone went around and found the 9 o'clock minyan. So then ein tzarich lahashlim, you won't have to make it up next week, because most of the tzibur were taken care of. Aval, however, imrov hatzibur lo shamu klal, if most of the tzibur just left it, they missed out laning, or maybe it was the latest minyan in town, they were mevatel laning, they couldn't go anywhere else. Even though in the neighborhood there are other shuls who lane regularly, those people from that minyan who missed the kriyas haTorah, v'heim rov hatzibur shel beis hakneses zeh, and that's most of the tzibur from the shul, tzrichim lahashlim hakriya, they have to make up the kriya. I'd like to read a couple of interesting notes in the back of the sefer on page number 4. So if you look at page number 4 in the back of the sefer, note number 13. So we said the reason why you can't make up Vayechi together with Shmos is because we usually connect the double parsha with one person laying in the end of one parsha and the beginning of the next parsha. So what about the following Eitzah, says note 13? Umashe ein koren parshas Vayechi levad. So maybe instead of laying Shmos, the week of Shmos, you should just lay in Vayechi, and then by Va'era you could lay Shmos and Va'era, you could chap all the parshios. Why are we just skipping Vayechi totally? We understand you can't put together Vayechi and Shmos, according to the Shita. But just lay in Vayechi this week, and next week you could lay Shmos and Va'era, they're the same sefer. Says note 13, Omash she'ein koren parshas Vayechi levad, and that which we don't lay in Vayechi alone on that week, Ubeshabes haba yikru shtei sidros, and the next week laying Shmos and Va'era. So explains the Dogel Mirvava, Shala'olam ein dochen es chovas hashah mipnei davar sha'avar zmano. You're never going to push off that week's parsha for a week that you missed. If this week is Parsha Shmos, we lay in Parsha Shmos. We're not going to say the week of Shmos, lay in Vayechi, and then we'll push Shmos off. Shmos belongs this week, you don't push it off, and therefore that is not an Eitzah. One other point, we said there are those who argue with this and say you could always join two Parshios, even if it's from Vayechi and Shmos from different Svarim. Says no 14, there's one exception. Then Dilgu al Parshas V'zos HaBracha. If you missed the last Parsha, you missed Zos HaBracha, Rechaim Kanievsky writes, Shem Mistaber She'yasher Lashleima Parshas Bereshis. You can't make it up the next week by laying Bereshis with Zos HaBracha. Then Rechaim says that would already be too late. Says the Mishna Berura weiter, we are up to Sivkaton Ches, the last line on page 32. So he said, Koren Osa Parsha. So we said if you miss 1 week, you'll lay in it next week with that week's parsha. V'hainu sheyikru keseder haksuvas b'Torah. You read the parshios in the order of the way they're written in the Torah. Mitchila shel Shabbos ha'avar. You miss Shmos, so the week of Va'era you first read Shmos, then you read Va'era. V'achar kal shel Shabbos and then you read this week's parsha. You go in order of the Torah. V'atam kosav sham, and the reason is brought down there. Now in note 17 he points out from the Or Zarua that the reason we're about to bring down does not explain why you're reading last week's Parsha before this week's Parsha. That is not explained. The reason we're going to bring down is why you make up the Parsha Stam. That's what he points out in note 17. If you look at note 17 he says Tam Zeh, which we didn't read yet, we'll read in a second. The Or Zarua writes Al Iker Din HaShlama. He's only explaining why we make up a Parsha that we missed. Ve'ein Zeh Tam Al HaKadomas Parsha Shavua HaKodem Parsha Shavua Zeh. He's not explaining with this reason why we read Shmos before Va'era. If we missed Shmos last week and we're reading Shmos and Va'era this week, l'chara the reason for that is to keep the parshios in order. Mistama, that's the reason. But the reason brought here is not a reason for that, even though from the flow of the Mishna Berura, it sounds like that's the reason that he's bringing down, because the Mishna Berura just said, you first read last week's parsha and then you read this week's parsha. But says the Mishna Berura, Tam Kosav Shom, Kim Yemos Moshe Rabbeinu Olav Hashalom Nitkan Likros HaTorah V'Parshiyoseh Ula Shlima. From the days of Moshe Rabbeinu, it was established to read the Torah, its Parshios, and to be Mashlim. Kedei LaHashlima La'om Mitzvos HaChukim. In order to read a Hashlama, that all of the congregation should hear the Mitzvos and the Chukim. And therefore, clearly, that's a reason why we would make it up, but it's by no means giving us a reason, like we just pointed out, of why it's dafka in that order, that you read last week's Parsha before this week's Parsha. But again, l'chorah, the reason is just time to keep the Parshios in order. We'll stop here, continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem, from Siv Gimel.